hope you enjoy the story. Let's begin. Lennox Bray sat at his desk, fingers moving across the keyboard as lines of code flowed onto the screen. He checked his watch, nearly 8. Rose would be home soon from her wine night with Cambria. He closed his laptop, muscles tight from hours of focused work. He preferred the silence of the empty office, the uninterrupted concentration that allowed him to build digital fortresses for clients who needed protection. His phone buzzed with a text from Rosalind. Coming home late. Don't wait up. Lennox frowned slightly. Third time this month. He texted back. Everything okay? The reply came quickly. Fine point, one word. He stared at it before pocketing his phone. There was a new distance between them lately, something he couldn't quite identify. Small things. Rosalind's smiles not reaching her eyes. Conversations fading into silence. Her body turning away from his in bed. Lennox drove home through light rain, the kind of perpetual drizzle that Seattle residents barely noticed. The house was dark when he arrived, just as he expected. Across town, Rosalind swirled her wine glass, the deep red liquid catching the low light of the upscale bar where she sat with Cambria. They'd been friends since childhood, weathering the storms of adolescence together. Where Rosalind was warm and open, Cambria was poised and controlled, her dark hair pulled back in a severe style that accentuated her sharp features. You seem distracted tonight, Cambria said, setting down her glass. Rosalind sighed. Work's been intense. The new campaign launch is in 2 weeks. Are you sure that's all it is? Cambria's voice dropped slightly. How are things with Lennox? Good. Fine. Rosalind shrugged. He's busy with a new security contract. Cambria traced the rim of her glass with one finger. I saw him, you know. Rosalind looked up. Saw him where? At that cafe on Pike Street. Twice now. Cambria's tone was casual, but her eyes were fixed on Rosalind's face. With a woman. A client probably, Rosalind said, but her heart rate quickened. He meets with people all the time. They seemed familiar with each other. Cambria reached across the table, covering Rosalind's hand with her own. I wouldn't say anything if I wasn't concerned. It reminded me of, well, you know, your dad. The mention of her father sent a cold spike through Rosalind's chest. Martin Carrington's affairs had been an open secret in their household growing up, each one breaking her mother a little more until there was nothing left to break. Did you take a photo? Rosalind asked, her mouth subtly dry. Cambria shook her head. It happened too fast. I was just passing by. She squeezed Rosalind's hand. It could be nothing, but I thought you should know, especially since he's been working so late recently. The seed was planted, taking root in fertile soil, the buried fear that had lived in Rosalind since childhood. That all men were like her father. That loyalty was an illusion. That betrayal was inevitable. How did she look? Rosalind asked, her voice small. Young. Pretty. Cambria hesitated just long enough. But that doesn't mean. Was he smiling? Rosalind interrupted. The real smile, the one with the creases around his eyes? Cambria hesitated just long enough. Yes, that exact smile. Rosalind drained her wine glass in one long swallow and signaled the bartender for another. The familiar burn of suspicion began to spread through her chest. I'm sure it's nothing, Cambria said, but her tone suggested the opposite, by the time Rosalind returned home that night. Lennox was asleep. She stood in the doorway of their bedroom, watching the rise and fall of his chest. He looked peaceful, untroubled. She wondered what secrets lay behind that calm exterior. She slipped into bed beside him, keeping to her side. For the first time in their marriage, she felt like she was sleeping next to a stranger. Morning light filtered through the blinds. Lennox woke to find Rosalind's side of the bed empty and cold. He found her in the kitchen, already dressed for work, a cup of coffee clutched in her hands. Morning, he said, pressing a kiss to her temple. She didn't lean into it as she usually did. Sleep well? She asked, not meeting his eyes. Like a rock. You got in late. He poured his own coffee, black and strong. Lot to catch up on with Cambria. Rosalind's voice was neutral, careful. Everything good with her? Fine. Rosalind gathered her bag and keys. I have an early meeting. Don't forget we have dinner with the Hansons on Friday. I'll be there, Lennox promised, watching as she walked out without the goodbye kiss that had been their morning ritual for 7 years. Something was off, but he couldn't put his finger on it. He pulled out his phone to text her, "Have a good day, love you," and hesitated when he saw her phone on the counter. She'd forgotten it in her rush. Lennox picked it up, intending to take it to her office. The screen lit up with a notification, a text from Cambria. "Did you check his phone yet?" His thumb hovered over the message. He had never gone through Rosalind's phone. Trust was the bedrock of their relationship. But that message... He set the phone down, a small frown creasing his brow. Check his phone for what? When he dropped the phone off at Rosalind's office, she took it with a quick thanks and turned away, already engaged in conversation with a colleague. No explanation for the text, no chance to ask. Over the next 2 weeks, the distance between them grew. Rosalind began staying late at work, her explanations vague. Their conversations became superficial. She stopped asking about his day, stopped sharing details of hers. At night, she tapped away on her phone until late, angling the screen away from him. One night, Lennox woke at 3 a.m. to find her side of the bed empty. He found her in the living room, his laptop open in front of her. "Rose, what are you doing?" She jumped, startled. "Couldn't sleep. Thought I'd catch up on some work emails. On my laptop." His voice was even controlled. "My battery died." She closed the lid quickly. "Sorry, I didn't want to wake you." Lennox nodded, not believing her for a second. Coming back to bed. In a minute, he returned to their bedroom, listening to the soft clicks as she continued to type. Something important had shifted between them, and he didn't understand why. When she finally returned to bed, he pretended to be asleep, feeling the careful distance she maintained between their bodies. The next morning, he checked his laptop's history. She'd been going through his emails, his calendar, even his search history. Looking for what? Evidence of what? He cleared the browser history without comment. That evening, Cambria came over for dinner, something that had once been a regular occurrence, but had become rare in recent months. "Been too long," Cambria said, embracing him with the perfect amount of warmth. "You've been keeping yourself busy." "Always am," Lennox replied, noticing how her eyes tracked him as he moved around the kitchen. Throughout dinner, he caught the weighted glances between Rosalind and Cambria, the way their conversation seemed to operate on 2 levels. Cambria kept dropping mentions of places he frequented: the cafe, near his office, the bookstore downtown. "Still have your Friday lunch at Pike Place?" she asked casually. "When I can," he answered, watching Rosalind's face tighten at the question. After Cambria left, Rosalind was silent as they cleaned up. "What's going on, Rose?" Lennox finally asked. "Something's off." "Nothing's going on," she replied too quickly. "I'm just tired." "Is it work? Is it us?" "There's nothing wrong with us," she insisted, but she wouldn't meet his eyes. Later that night, he watched her check his phone while she thought he was in the shower. She scrolled through his messages, his call log, his emails. He stepped back into the bedroom silently, observing her frantic search. "If you want to know something, you could just ask me," he said quietly. Rosalind dropped the phone as if it had burned her. Your phone kept buzzing." "No, it didn't." She turned away, her shoulders rigid. "I don't want to fight." "Neither do I. I want to know what's happening with my wife." "Nothing is happening," she insisted. "I'm going to bed." The wall between them grew higher. Lennox began noticing other changes: Rosalind coming home with her hair freshly styled midweek, wearing new clothes, perfume he didn't recognize. Her unexplained absences became more frequent, her excuses thinner. One evening, she mentioned a weekend marketing retreat that had never appeared on her work calendar. When he pointed this out, she became defensive. "Are you checking up on me now?" she demanded. "Just trying to keep our schedule straight," he replied calmly. "We used to do that, remember? Well, maybe I forgot to mention it. It's not a big deal." But it was, and they both knew it. That night, he received a text from Cambria. "We need to talk." "About Rose." "Coffee tomorrow?" He agreed, curious what game Cambria was playing. The next day, they met at a quiet cafe away from their usual haunts. "I'm worried about her," Cambria began, her face a perfect mask of concern. "She's convinced you're having an affair." Lennox's expression didn't change, though he felt a cold anger building inside him. "And where did she get that idea?" Cambria hesitated. "She's been noticing things. Your late nights, unexplained absences. I work late because clients sometimes have emergencies, he said evenly. Rose knows my schedule. She's always known the demands of my job. I believe you, Cambria said, reaching across to touch his hand. He moved it away. But she's fragile when it comes to this stuff because of her dad. You know how that affected her. I'm not her father, Lennox said, his voice low and controlled. I've never given her any reason to doubt me. Of course not. Cambria sighed. Look, I'm just trying to help. Maybe be extra transparent for a while. Reassure her. Lennox looked at her carefully, noting the slight gleam in her eyes that didn't match her concerned expression. Thanks for the advice, he said non-committally. As he walked back to his office, he began to see the shape of something disturbing. Rosalind's behavior, Cambria's warnings, the seed of suspicion that had been planted. Someone was manipulating his wife, and he was almost certain he knew who it was. That night, he tried one more time to reach Rosalind. Whatever you think is happening, you're wrong, he told her as they prepared for bed. If something's bothering you, we should talk about it. Nothing's bothering me, she insisted, but her voice was cold, distant. Rose, in 7 years, have I ever lied to you? Have I ever given you any reason not to trust me? She looked at him then, something hard in her eyes. Everyone lies eventually, Lennox. Some are just better at hiding it than others. He recognized the echo of her childhood trauma in her words, the deep-seated fear that had been reawakened. I'm not everyone, he said quietly. I'm your husband. But he could see his words weren't reaching her. Something had shifted fundamentally between them, and he wasn't sure if they could find their way back. Later that week, Lennox checked their phone records. Rosalind had been calling and texting a number he didn't recognize multiple times a day. The timing matched her unexplained absences. He didn't confront her with this information yet, but he began keeping a log of her behaviors, the inconsistencies in her stories, the gaps in her schedule. He was a professional in data security. Finding patterns was what he did best. Trevor Miles leaned against the wall outside the conference room, his carefully casual pose betraying hours of gym work. His smile widened as Rosalind approached, marketing presentations tucked under her arm. Saved you a seat, he said, opening the door for her. Right next to me. How thoughtful, Rosalind replied, noticing how his eyes lingered on her as she walked past. Trevor had joined the marketing team 3 months ago, bringing energy and fresh ideas that had quickly made him a favorite with management. He was attractive in an obvious way, tall, confident, with a ready smile and easy compliments. Under normal circumstances, Rosalind would have maintained professional boundaries with someone like Trevor. But these weren't normal circumstances. His attention felt good, simple, uncomplicated. There were no suspicions with Trevor, no history of betrayal lurking beneath the surface. After the meeting, he suggested drinks to discuss the new campaign. Just professional, he said with a wink that suggested otherwise. Rosalind hesitated, thinking of Lennox at home, probably working late again, meeting with clients, or whoever she was. Sure, she said. Professional drinks sound perfect. 1 drink turned into 3. Their conversation shifted from marketing strategies to personal histories. Trevor's hand brushed against hers repeatedly, each touch lingering longer than necessary. Your husband's a lucky man, Trevor said, his eyes never leaving her face. Is he? Rosalind's voice was bitter. I'm not so sure about that. Trouble in paradise? Trevor moved closer. Paradise is overrated. She finished her drink, feeling reckless. Another round? By the time they left the bar, the professional pretense had evaporated. In the dim light of the parking garage, Trevor kissed her, and Rosalind let him. It felt like punishment, like justice, like balancing scales that had tilted without her knowledge. She pulled away first. I should go home. Do you want to? Trevor asked, his hand still on her waist. No, she admitted, but I will anyway. For now. Over the next few weeks, their relationship evolved from lingering touches to stolen kisses in empty conference rooms to long lunches spent in Trevor's car. Rosalind told herself it was about revenge, about evening the score. But part of her recognized the comfort she found in Trevor's uncomplicated desire, the escape from the Cold War that had developed at home. But a month after that first drink, Trevor booked a hotel room. No pressure, he said, sliding the key card across the table at lunch. But if you want to continue this conversation somewhere private. Rosalind looked at the key, feeling a strange mixture of anticipation and dread. What time? I'll be there at 7. Room 1412. She texted Lennox, working late tonight. Don't wait up. His reply came promptly. Okay. Love you. Those 2 words sent a spike of guilt through her, quickly smothered by renewed anger. How dare he pretend? How dare he maintain this facade of the perfect husband while sneaking around behind her back? At 7:15, she knocked on the hotel room door. Trevor opened it, already in a robe, champagne chilling beside the bed. Wasn't sure you'd come, he said, pulling her into the room. Neither was I, but she was here now, crossing a line that couldn't be uncrossed. His kisses were hungry, demanding, different from Lennox's measured affection. Trevor didn't know her body, didn't understand its rhythms, but there was something freeing in that anonymity. This wasn't about connection, it was about obliteration, about drowning out the pain of betrayal with physical sensation. Afterward, lying in the anonymous hotel bed, Rosalind felt hollow rather than satisfied. Trevor scrolled through his phone beside her, already mentally moving on to the next thing. We should do this again, he said, not looking up from his screen. Yes, she agreed, though something inside her recoiled at the thought. She dressed quickly, avoiding her reflection in the mirror. What would Lennox be doing right now? Working late? Or meeting with her? The nameless woman Cambria had seen him with. At home, Lennox was sitting in the living room, reading, glasses perched on his nose, a technical manual open in his lap. So domestic, so normal. It made her anger flare brighter. Good meeting? He asked, looking up. Productive, she replied, avoiding his eyes. I'm going to shower. Under the hot water, she scrubbed at her skin, trying to wash away the evidence of her betrayal. Not that Lennox would notice he barely touched her these days. Their marriage had become a choreographed dance of avoidance. 2 people orbiting each other without connection. She told herself it was his fault. He had started this with his own infidelity. She was just responding in kind. But in the quiet moments, doubt crept in. What if Cambria was wrong? What if she had misunderstood? These doubts never lasted long. Cambria would reinforce her suspicions with new sightings, new insinuations. He was at that new restaurant downtown, the one you mentioned wanting to try. Was it with you, was he? Each new piece of information renewed Rosalind's conviction. Her affair with Trevor intensified, moving from weekly meetings to multiple rendezvous. They grew careless hush phone calls that weren't so hushed, emails that weren't deleted, hotel receipts left in pockets. Take tea home. Her coldness toward Lennox deepened. She found fault with everything he did, picked fights over nothing, withdrew from any attempt at intimacy. Part of her wanted him to fight back, to show some emotion, to break his infuriating composure. But he remained steady, watching her with those calm eyes that seemed to see too much. Whatever's going on with you, he said one night after a particularly bitter argument, I hope you figure it out before you destroy something you can't rebuild. Maybe it's already destroyed, she snapped. Maybe it has been for a while. A flicker of something, pain? Anger? Crossed his face before his expression smoothed back into careful neutrality. Maybe, but that would be a shame. The guilt that surfaced after these encounters was always quickly smothered by renewed conversations with Cambria, who fed her suspicions like fuel to a fire. Of course he seems innocent, Cambria told her over coffee. He's smart, that's why you married him. He knows how to cover his tracks. That makes it worse, doesn't it? The calculation of it all. And Rosalind would nod, hardening her heart once more, turning back to Trevor and the temporary escape he provided. But sometimes, in the dark of night, lying beside Lennox's sleeping form, doubt would creep in again. Had she ever actually asked him? Had she ever given him a chance to defend himself? Had she destroyed their marriage based on nothing but Cambria's whispers and her own deep-seated fears? These moments of clarity never lasted. By morning, anger and suspicion would settle back over her like a familiar cloak, and the cycle would continue. What she couldn't know, was that Lennox was awake during those quiet moments of doubt, feeling her restlessness beside him, wondering what had gone so terribly wrong between them. The Seattle rain pounded against the windows of Lennox's downtown office, matching his increasingly dark mood. 3 months had passed since that first noticeable shift in Rosalind's behavior, and what had started as small inconsistencies had bloomed into something undeniable. Lennox swiveled in his chair, facing the windows overlooking the city skyline. In the reflection, he could see his own composed face, the controlled expression he'd perfected over years of business negotiations. That same control had served him well at home lately, as his marriage deteriorated before his eyes. His phone buzzed with a text from Silas. "Still on for lunch?" Lennox texted back a quick affirmative. His younger brother had become a lifeline during the past few months, one of the few people he could speak honestly with about the situation at home. They could tea the restaurant. Silas was already waiting, his military short hair and watchful eyes marking him as different from the tech workers filling the downtown eatery. After leaving cyber intelligence work for the government, Silas had stayed in that world, just from the private sector side. "You look like shit," Silas said by way of greeting. "Good to see you too," Lennox replied, sliding into the booth. "Still not sleeping?" Lennox shook his head. "Hard to sleep when your wife comes home smelling like another man's cologne." Silas's jaw tightened. "Have you confronted her yet?" "Not yet." Lennox took a sip of water. "I need more information." "What more do you need?" "She's clearly—" "I need to understand why." Lennox interrupted. "This isn't just about the affair. Something else is driving this." The waitress came by to take their orders, and they fell silent until she left. "It's Cambria," Lennox said once they were alone again. "She's been feeding Rose something, convincing her that I'm having an affair." Silas's eyebrows shot up. "Are you?" "Of course not." Lennox's voice remained even, but his eyes hardened. "You know me better than that." "Just checking." Silas leaned forward. "So Cambria's poisoning the well. But why?" "That's what I'm trying to figure out." They've been friends since childhood, but lately, there's something not right about their relationship. Cambria's always whispering in her ear, always showing up when Rose and I are having problems. "You think she's deliberately trying to break you up?" "I think she enjoys the control," Lennox said. "She likes being the one Rose turns to. And maybe there's more to it than that." Their food arrived, and they ate in silence for a few minutes. "I could help you," Silas finally said. "Get some concrete evidence of what's going on." Lennox hesitated. "I don't want to invade Rose's privacy more than necessary." Silas snorted. "She gave up the right to privacy when she started cheating on you." "It's not that simple." "It actually is that simple, Lennox. She betrayed you. Most guys wouldn't be as calm as you are right now." Lennox set down his fork. "Getting angry doesn't solve problems. I need facts, not emotions." "That's your problem, you know," Silas said, shaking his head. "You're too controlled, too logical. Sometimes a situation calls for throwing a punch. Violence doesn't solve anything. Neither does sitting around while your wife screws someone else." Lennox's expression didn't change, but something cold settled in his eyes. "I'm not sitting around. I'm gathering information. And when I have enough, I'll act." "Fair enough." Silas leaned back. "What do you need from me?" "Phone records, for now. I want to know who she's been talking to, when, and for how long." "I can get you that," Silas nodded. "What about Cambria?" "Wanting to look into her too." "Yes," Lennox said after a moment's thought. "Everything you can find. I want to know what her angle is." After lunch, Lennox returned to his office, settling back into work with the same focus he applied to everything. Compartmentalization was a skill he'd learned early, growing up in a neighborhood where showing weakness meant becoming a target. His single mother had taught him and Silas to control their emotions, to think before acting, to never let anyone see them bleed. Those lessons had served him well in business. Now they were keeping him from falling apart as his marriage crumbled. His phone rang Rosalind. "Hello," he answered, his voice betraying nothing of his earlier conversation. "Hi," she said, sounding distracted. "I'm going to be late tonight." "Don't wait up." "Another work event?" he asked, knowing it was a lie out of a slight pause. "Yes, the Johnson campaign. We're finalizing details for the launch." "I see," Lennox said, making a note of the excuse. "Well, good luck with it." "Thanks," she said, already disconnecting. Lennox set down his phone and turned to his computer. With a few keystrokes, he pulled up Rosalind's work calendar, which they still shared from their more connected days. No Johnson campaign meeting. No work events at all after 5 p.m. He added this discrepancy to the log he'd been keeping. The document was extensive now, tracking patterns of behavior, inconsistencies in her stories, unexplained absences. It was the kind of methodical data collection he'd use for a security audit, now applied to his own marriage. That evening, he came home to an empty house. He moved through his normal routine, changing clothes, preparing a simple dinner, reviewing work documents. At 9, his phone buzzed with a text from Silas. Got the record you asked for. Check your secure email. Lennox opened his laptop and accessed the encrypted email account he used for sensitive communications. Silas had sent phone records for both Rosalind and Cambria for the past 3 months, along with a spreadsheet highlighting patterns and connections. The data confirmed what he already suspected. Frequent calls between Rosalind and Cambria, often followed by calls to a number identified as belonging to Trevor Miles. Hotel reservations made in Trevor's name, corresponding with nights Rosalind claimed to be working late. But there was something else, a pattern of calls from Cambria to Trevor that Lennox hadn't anticipated. They were speaking to each other independently of Rosalind. The timing of these calls was interesting too. They often occurred right after Cambria and Rosalind had spoken. Lennox frowned, considering the implications. Was Trevor also being manipulated? Or was he part of whatever game Cambria was playing? He heard the front door open and close, Rosalind's keys jingling as she set them in the bowl by the door. He closed the laptop as she entered the living room. "You're still up," she said, surprise and something like annoyance in her voice. "Just finishing some work," he replied, studying her. Her lipstick was slightly smudged, her hair not quite as perfectly styled as it had been that morning. She avoided his eyes as she set down her bag. "How was the Johnson meeting?" he asked, keeping his tone casual. "Fine. Productive." She headed toward the stairs. "I'm going to shower and go to bed. I'm exhausted." "Rose," he called after her, making her pause on the stairs. "Is everything okay with us?" She turned, her expression guarded. "What do you mean?" "You know what I mean. You're distant. You're barely home. We hardly talk anymore. I've been busy with work. Is that all it is?" Her eyes narrowed slightly. "What are you implying?" "I'm not implying anything," Lennox said calmly. "I'm asking a direct question about the state of our marriage. If something's wrong, we should talk about it." For a moment, he thought she might break, might finally say what was really happening. But then her expression hardened. "Nothing's wrong with our marriage that wouldn't be fixed by you being honest for once. I've always been honest with you, Rose." She laughed, a bitter sound that held no humor. "Right? Of course you have. If you think I haven't been, tell me how. Give me a chance to defend myself. I don't want to do this right now." She turned away, continuing up the stairs. "I'm tired." Lennox didn't follow her. Instead, he opened his laptop again, adding this latest exchange to his log. The pattern was clear now. Every time he pushed for honesty, Rosalind deflected, counter-accused, or withdrew. He heard the shower start upstairs. In their early years, he might have joined her. Now, he could feel the gulf between them, widening every day. What had started as whispers in the dark had become a roaring silence. His phone buzzed with another text from Silas. "Found something interesting about Cambria. Call me tomorrow." Lennox closed his laptop and leaned back, staring at the ceiling. He'd always believed that the truth, clearly presented, could solve any problem. But for that to work, both sides had to be willing to hear it. Rosalind, it seemed, had already decided what the truth was, and nothing he said or did was going to change her mind unless he could find evidence compelling enough to break through the walls she'd built. The question was whether their marriage would be worth saving by the time he gathered that evidence. She tried to break up at least 3 of her friends' relationships over the years, Silas said, sliding a folder across the table to Lennox. They were meeting in a quiet corner of a public library, away from their usual haunts. Always the same pattern: whispering campaigns, manufactured evidence, playing the concerned friend. Lennox opened the folder, scanning the content, screenshots of old social media posts, text messages, emails that Silas had somehow obtained. "How did you get all this?" "Better not to ask," Silas replied with a shrug. "But it's all legitimate." Cambria Knox has a history of inserting herself into other people's relationships, especially when those relationships are stable and happy. But why? Lennox frowned, reading a particularly vicious email Cambria had sent to a friend's boyfriend years ago, pretending to be from another woman. Control. Attention. The pleasure of being needed during the inevitable fallout. Silas leaned forward. Some people can't stand to see others happy. Makes them confront their own misery. Lennox continued reading, his expression growing darker. She's been doing this to us from the beginning. Looks that way, Silas agreed. Those coffee shop sightings she reported to Rosalind? I cross-referenced the dates with your work calendar. You were in client meetings for every single one, with multiple witnesses. I knew she was lying, Lennox said quietly. But this is calculated, deliberate. It gets worse, Silas said, tapping the folder. Look at the last page. Lennox turned to it, a bank statement showing regular payment from Cambria's account to Trevor Miles, starting 2 months ago. She's paying him. Lennox's voice remained level, but his knuckles whitened as he gripped the folder. Not much, but yes. My guess. She encouraged the affair, maybe even engineered the introduction. Trevor gets a little cash, gets to sleep with Rosalind, and Cambria gets to further destabilize your marriage. Lennox closed the folder, his mind racing through implications and options. Does Rose know about this? Is she part of it? Silas shook his head. I don't think so. From what I can tell, she's as much a victim as you are, just playing a different role in Cambria's little drama. She still chose to have an affair, Lennox pointed out. Cambria may have manipulated the situation, but Rose made that decision. True, Silas acknowledged. So what now, brother? You got your evidence. What are you going to do with it? Lennox was silent for a long moment, thinking through scenarios and outcomes with the same methodical precision he applied to security protocols. I need more, he finally said. This proves Cambria's manipulation, but I need direct evidence of her admitting what she's done. And I need proof of Rosalind's affair that she can't deny or explain away. You're going to keep living with her while she's sleeping with another man. Silas's voice held disbelief. Just a little longer, Lennox said. I need everything to be airtight before I make my move. Why? Just leave. Divorce her and be done with it. Lennox shook his head. It's not that simple. When I do this, I want no ambiguity, no room for manipulation. I want the truth laid bare for everyone to see, especially Rose. This is about more than just ending your marriage, Silas observed. You want justice. I want accountability, Lennox corrected. I play by the rules. I was faithful, honest, transparent. I deserve an ending that acknowledges that. Fair enough, Silas said. So what's next? I need to talk to Mara, Lennox replied. I need to understand my legal options. Mara Estevez's law office overlooked the waterfront, the large windows framing a view of ferries crossing the Sound. She greeted Lennox with a firm handshake, her dark eyes assessing him quickly. You look like hell, she said bluntly, echoing Silas's earlier assessment. So I've been told, Lennox replied, taking a seat across from her desk. Silas called ahead, gave me the basics, Mara said, getting straight to business. Cheating wife, manipulative friend. You want to know your options? Yes, Lennox confirmed. But there are complications. For the next hour, he laid out everything: the affair, Cambria's manipulation, the evidence he'd gathered, his suspicions about deeper collusion between Cambria and Trevor. Mara took notes, asking pointed questions about finances, assets, timing. She didn't offer sympathy or outrage, just clinical analysis, which was exactly what Lennox needed. You're in a stronger position than most betrayed spouses, she finally said. You have solid evidence of the affair, and you haven't confronted her, which means she has no idea what you know. That's tactically advantageous. What about Cambria's role? Does that matter legally? It could, Mara said thoughtfully. In Washington, we're in no-fault state for divorce, so the affair itself doesn't automatically give you an advantage in asset division. But if you can prove malicious intent and collusion, especially if there's financial entanglement like these payments, to Trevor we might be able to make a case for marital sabotage. Which would mean what exactly? Potentially a more favorable division of assets, maybe even damages in a separate civil suit against Cambria. Mara tapped her pen against the desk. But to make that stick, you need rock-solid evidence. The kind that would stand up in court. That's what I'm working on, Lennox said. I want to set a trap for Cambria. Get her to admit what she's done, on record. Mara raised an eyebrow. Risky. If she realizes what you're doing, she'll warn Rosalind, and you'll lose your element of surprise. I've thought of that, Lennox nodded. But I know Cambria's weakness. She likes to feel superior, in control. If I approach her seeming defeated, asking for her help in saving my marriage, she might overplay her hand. Worth a try, Mara agreed. What about Rosalind? How do you want to handle her? Once I have everything in place, I'll confront her directly. Present all the evidence at once, so there's no room for denial or deflection. And then what? Is reconciliation on the table? Lennox was quiet for a moment. No, he finally said. Some betrayals can't be forgiven. Mara studied him, her expression unreadable. Just to be clear, you're certain about this? Once we move forward, there's no going back. I'm certain, Lennox said, his voice firm. I gave her multiple opportunities to talk to me, to be honest. She chose deception over and over again. I'm done. All right then, Mara nodded, making a few more notes. Let's talk specifics about how to proceed. They spent the next hour discussing strategy, what evidence to gather, how to secure financial assets, the timing of legal filings. Mara was thorough, covering contingencies and worst-case scenarios with brutal efficiency. As Lennox was preparing to leave, she stopped him with a hand on his arm. One more thing, she said. When this all comes out, it's going to get ugly. Cambria will fight back. Rosalind will likely feel humiliated and lash out. Are you prepared for that? I'm prepared for anything, Lennox replied. I've spent my life building systems to withstand attacks. This is no different. Except it is, Mara countered. This isn't code or data. This is your life, your marriage. There's no perfect security protocol for that. Maybe not, Lennox acknowledged. But there is truth. And that's what I'm after, whatever the cost. Back at his office, Lennox created a new secure folder on his private server. In it, he began organizing all the evidence: phone records, calendar discrepancies, hotel receipts, bank statements showing the payment from Cambria to Trevor. He cross-referenced timestamps, creating a timeline of the affair alongside Cambria's interventions. The pattern was unmistakable. Cambria would plant a new suspicion. Rosalind would pull away further, and within days, she would meet with Trevor. It was a cycle of manipulation and betrayal, clearly documented in the cold, hard data. But Lennox knew that data alone wouldn't be enough. He needed Cambria's confession, and he needed indisputable evidence of Rosalind's affair that she couldn't rationalize away. He picked up his phone and texted Cambria. Need to talk. About Rose. Can we meet tomorrow? Her reply came quickly. Of course. What's wrong? I'll explain in person. Just us, please, sure. The usual cafe at 2? Perfect. Thank you. Lennox set down his phone, a grim satisfaction settling over him. The web was starting to unravel. Soon, everyone involved would face the consequences of their choices, including him. Because he knew that whatever justice he achieved would come at the cost of the life he'd built, the marriage he'd once believed in, the future he'd planned. There would be no winners here, only survivors. And Lennox Bray was nothing if not a survivor. The cafe was busy with the afternoon crowd, providing just enough background noise for privacy without isolation. Lennox arrived early, securing a corner table and setting up his phone in a position that would capture their conversation clearly. The recording app was already running. Disguised as a battery monitor on his screen, he spotted Cambria entering, her sharp gaze scanning the room until it landed on him. Her expression shifted immediately to one of concern as she approached, but Lennox had spent enough time analyzing her now to see the calculation behind her eyes. Lennox, she said, sliding into the seat across from him. You look terrible. What's going on? Thanks for meeting me, he replied, ignoring the comment about his appearance. He hunched his shoulders slightly, projecting defeat, a posture entirely foreign to his normal confident bearing. I didn't know who else to talk to. Cambria reached across the table, touching his hand briefly. Of course. I'm always here for you and Rosalind. You know that. Lennox nodded, looking down at his coffee. That's why I wanted to talk to you. About Rose. Things have been difficult at home. I've noticed, Cambria said, her voice softening with practiced sympathy. She hasn't been herself lately. No, she hasn't. Lennox agreed, carefully setting his trap. She's distant, secretive. She barely talks to me anymore. He paused and added, I think she might be seeing someone else. Cambria's eyes widened slightly, not with surprise, Lennox noted, but with interest. What makes you say that? Little things. Late nights at work. New clothes. She's always on her phone, but she hides the screen when I come near. He sighed, rubbing his face. I'm probably imagining things. But we used to be so close, and now... Have you asked her about it? Cambria's tone was careful, probing. Every time I try to talk to her, she gets defensive, accuses me of not trusting her. Lennox looked up, meeting Cambria's eyes directly. I thought maybe you might know something. You two are so close. Has she said anything to you? A flicker of something satisfaction, anticipation, crossed Cambria's face before she composed it into a mask of reluctant concern. Lennox, I don't know if I should be the one to tell you this. Please, he urged, allowing desperation to seep into his voice. I need to know what's happening to my marriage. Cambria sighed, a performance of conflicted loyalty. She has mentioned concerns about your fidelity. My fidelity? Lennox allowed genuine surprise to color his response. That's absurd. I've never even looked at another woman since we got married. I believe you, Cambria said quickly, too quickly. But Rosalind, she has these deep insecurities because of her father. You know how that affected her. But why would she suddenly suspect me now, after 7 years of marriage? Cambria hesitated, then leaned forward. This is difficult for me to say, but I think I might have inadvertently contributed to her suspicions. How? Lennox asked, though he already knew the answer. A few months ago, I saw someone who looked like you at a cafe with a woman. I mentioned it to Rosalind, just casually. I didn't think much of it at the time, but she became fixated on the idea. And did you see me? Was it actually me? Cambria waved a hand dismissively. It was across the street, just a glimpse. It probably wasn't you at all. But you know how Rosalind gets once an idea takes hold. So her suspicion of me is based on someone who might not even have been me. Seen from across the street? Lennox kept his voice level, though anger burned cold in his chest. I tried to tell her she was overreacting, Cambria claimed. But then she started noticing other things, your late nights, work calls at odd hours. Those are part of my job. Rose has always known that. I know. Cambria nodded sympathetically. But once suspicion takes root, everything becomes evidence. Lennox was silent for a moment, as if processing this information. Then he asked, do you think she's having an affair? Truly, Cambria's expression shifted subtly, a predator scenting blood. I didn't want to be the one to tell you this, but yes, I think she is. With who? Trevor Miles. From her office. Cambria's voice dropped to a whisper, though her eyes gleamed. She hasn't admitted it outright, but the signs are there. And how long have you suspected this? Lennox asked, keeping his tone desperate rather than accusatory. A few weeks now, Cambria lied smoothly. I've been trying to guide her to make her see sense. But she's convinced herself that she's just evening the score. Evening the score for something I didn't do, Lennox said bitterly. I never had proof, Cambria said, reaching for his hand again. But it was better for her to know what you're capable of. Emotional damage control, you know? Better to be prepared than blindsided. There was the confession, caught clearly on his recording. Cambria admitting she deliberately planted suspicion without proof, framing it as protection. So what should I do? Lennox asked, allowing his voice to crack slightly. How do I fix this? I'm not sure you can, Cambria said, poorly concealed satisfaction in her tone. Some betrayals run too deep to repair. But I didn't betray her, Lennox insisted. You just said you never had proof because there was nothing to prove. Cambria backtracked slightly, realizing her misstep. What I mean is, her perception of betrayal is what matters now. Whether it happened or not, she believes it did. Because you convinced her it did, Lennox said, his voice suddenly firmer. That Cambria's eyes narrowed slightly. I was just being a good friend, sharing what I saw. What you thought you saw, Lennox corrected. From across the street. With no details or evidence. Just enough to plant doubt in a woman you knew had childhood trauma around infidelity. You're twisting my words, Cambria said, her sympathetic mask slipping. I was trying to help. Were you? Lennox leaned forward. Or were you trying to sabotage our marriage? Like you did with Jessica and Mark? And Allie and David? Cambria's face paled slightly. I don't know what you're talking about. I think you do, Lennox said, his voice level but cold. I think you've made a habit of destroying relationships. And I think you've been paying Trevor Miles to sleep with my wife. That's ridiculous, Cambria hissed, but her eyes darted around, checking if anyone nearby could hear. Is it? I have the bank records, Cambria. Regular payments from your account to his, starting right around the time their affair began. Quite a coincidence. Cambria's facade cracked completely now, anger replacing the manufacturer concern. You can't prove anything. Actually, I can, Lennox replied calmly. I have phone records showing your calls to Trevor before and after your meetings with Rosalind. I have evidence of you fabricating stories about seeing me with other women. I have a documented pattern of you doing this to other couples. So what? Cambria sneered. It's not illegal to dislike someone's husband. It's not illegal to tell your friend you're concerned about her marriage. No, but it might be illegal to pay someone to help break up a marriage. That could be construed as civil conspiracy, especially with the financial component. My lawyer thinks we have a strong case. Your lawyer? Cambria's voice rose slightly. Mara Estevez. Perhaps you've heard of her? She specializes in complex divorce cases and civil suits. Lennox allowed himself a small smile. She's quite interested in the pattern of behavior you've established. Cambria stood abruptly, gathering her bag. This conversation is over. It is, Lennox agreed, not moving. But there will be others in conference rooms, in depositions, possibly in court. You might want to start practicing your explanations. Cambria stared at him, hatred naked in her eyes. She won't believe you. You know that, right? Rosalind trusts me, not you. We'll see, Lennox said simply. After Cambria stormed out, Lennox remained at the table, stopping the recording and securing it to his protected server via an encrypted connection. Then he texted Silas. It's done. She confessed that Silas's reply was immediate. Now what? Now I confront Rosalind. Tonight, .it was time to end this, to cut through the web of lies and manipulation with the clean blade of truth. Whether his marriage survived was almost irrelevant now. What mattered was accountability, consequences, justice. What mattered was that no one would ever make him a victim without facing the full measure of his response. The house was quiet when Lennox arrived home, carrying the weight of knowledge and evidence. Rosalind's car was in the driveway. She was home early for once. He found her in the kitchen, preparing dinner, a rare occurrence these days. You're home, she said, surprise evident in her voice. I thought you'd be working late. Not today, Lennox replied, setting his laptop case on the counter with deliberate care. We need to talk, Rose. Something in his tone made her pause, wooden spoon suspended over the pot she was stirring. About what? About our marriage. About the truth. Rosalind's expression shuddered, the defensive wall coming up immediately. If this is another interrogation. It's not an interrogation, Lennox interrupted calmly. It's a conversation we should have had months ago, before things went this far. What things? Her voice held a challenge, but he could see the flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. I think you know. Lennox opened his laptop, typing in the password. But let's start at the beginning. He turned the screen toward her, showing a timeline. He'd created a visual representation of the destruction of their marriage, meticulously documented. 3 months ago, Cambria told you she saw me at a cafe with another woman. No details, no proof, just an insinuation. Lennox's voice was even, factual. The same day, I was in a client meeting with 5 other people. I have the calendar entry, meeting minutes, and emails confirming my location. Rosalind stared at the screen, not speaking. After that, Lennox continued. You began checking my phone, my emails, my calendar, looking for evidence of something that never happened. Again, I have logs showing when these accounts were accessed from your devices. You've been spying on me." Rosalind's voice rose with indignation. "I've been documenting patterns," Lennox corrected, "the same way I would for any security breach. And make no mistake, Rose, our marriage was breached." He clicked to the next screen, phone records highlighting frequent calls between Rosalind and Trevor, along with hotel receipts corresponding to nights she claimed to be working late. "Your affair with Trevor Miles began about a month after Cambria's first accusation. At first emotional, then physical. The first encounter was at the Harbor Inn, room 1412, on March 17th. Rosalind's face paled, her hands gripping the counter. "How did you?" "I'm good at my job," Lennox said simply. "Finding and analyzing data is what I do. But that's not the most interesting part of what I discovered." He clicked again, showing the call logs between Cambria and Trevor and the bank transfers. "Cambria and Trevor have been in regular contact throughout your affair, and she's been paying him small amounts, but consistent. Started right around the time your physical relationship began." "That can't be right," Rosalind whispered, staring at the evidence. "Cambria wouldn't." "Cambria has a history of doing exactly this," Lennox cut in, his voice still calm, but edged with steel now. "She's broken up at least 3 other relationships using similar tactics. Create suspicion, isolate the target, introduce a temptation, watch it all burn." He clicked to another screen, showing social media posts and messages from Cambria's previous victims. Jessica and Mark, Allie and David, Taylor and Michael. Same pattern, different players. Rosalind sank into a chair, her face ashen. Why would she do this? "We've been friends since we were children." Control, manipulation, the pleasure of being needed when it all falls apart. Lennox closed the laptop. "But her motives aren't my primary concern. Yours are. Mine." Rosalind looked up. "Yes." Lennox's gaze was steady, unflinching. "Cambria manipulated the situation. Yes. But you made choices, Rose. You chose to believe gossip over your husband. You chose not to ask me directly about what Cambria claimed to have seen. You chose to start an affair as punishment for a crime I didn't commit. I thought," Rosalind began. "You thought wrong," Lennox interrupted. "And you acted on that wrong thinking in the most destructive way possible." Tears welled in Rosalind's eyes. "I was scared. The things Cambria was saying, they reminded me so much of my father, of what he did to my mother." "I know," Lennox acknowledged. "And Cambria knew that too. She deliberately targeted your deepest insecurity. But Rose, we've been married for 7 years. In all that time, have I ever given you any reason not to trust me?" "No," she admitted, a tear spilling down her cheek. "Then why was it so easy for her to convince you that I had?" Rosalind had no answer, just more tears. Lennox took out his phone, playing the recording from his meeting with Cambria. Rosalind listened, her expression crumbling as she heard her friend admit to planting suspicion without proof, to deliberately manipulating her. When the recording ended, Rosalind looked up at Lennox, devastation in her eyes. "I'm so sorry. I should have trusted you. I should have asked you directly. I was so afraid of being made a fool of, like my mother was. Instead, you made yourself into something worse," Lennox said, his voice not unkind but uncompromising. "You became a betrayer, not the betrayed. Can we fix this?" Rosalind asked, hope and desperation mingling in her voice. "Now that we know the truth, can we try to rebuild?" Lennox was silent for a long moment, studying the woman he had loved for so many years. He saw her clearly now, the insecurities that had always lurked beneath her confidence, the fear of abandonment that shaped her reactions, the desperate need for control that had led her to such destructive choices. "No," he said finally, the word falling between them like a stone. "Some betrayals can't be forgiven, Rose. You didn't just have an affair, you did it as an act of retaliation. You wanted to hurt me, and you never once gave me the chance to defend myself. I made a terrible mistake," Rosalind pleaded, reaching for his hand. He moved it away. "It wasn't a mistake," Lennox corrected. "A mistake is forgetting an anniversary or saying something hurtful in anger. What you did was a series of deliberate choices, made day after day for months. You chose betrayal over trust, revenge over communication, Cambria over me. What happens now? Rosalind asked, her voice small. Now we end this cleanly and fairly. Lennox's tone was matter of fact. I've spoken with a lawyer. I'll be filing for divorce tomorrow morning. I've documented everything: the affair, Cambria's manipulation, the financial connections between her and Trevor. You should hire your own attorney. You've already decided all this. Shock replaced some of the defeat in Rosalind's expression. Without even giving me a chance to explain? You had months of chances to explain, to talk, to be honest. Lennox replied evenly. You chose deception every time. And yes, I've decided. Some things, once broken, can't be repaired. Rosalind's shock gave way to anger now, her tears drying up. So that's it? Your mind is made up, and I don't get a say? You had your say when you decided to sleep with Trevor, Lennox pointed out, his calm unbroken. Actions have consequences, Rose. These are yours. You're so cold, she accused, standing up. So calculated. Do you even feel anything about this? About us ending? I feel a great deal, Lennox said quietly. Anger, disappointment, grief for what might have been. But those feelings don't change what needs to happen now. And what's that? Accountability, consequences, justice. Lennox picked up his laptop. I'll be staying at Silas's for the time being. My lawyer will contact yours tomorrow to begin discussing terms. Terms, Rosalind repeated, her voice hollow. Financial division, mainly. Given the circumstances, documented infidelity, malicious intent, my lawyer believes I'm entitled to a larger portion of our marital assets. You're going to punish me financially too? It's not punishment, Rose. It's consequence. Lennox moved toward the door, then paused. You might want to call Cambria. I'm fairly certain she'll be served with a civil suit for intentional infliction of emotional distress and conspiracy by the end of the week. Rosalind stared at him, speechless. To the door. Lennox turned back one last time. You didn't even ask, Rose. You just acted. And I can't forgive someone who never gave me a chance to defend my truth. With that, he left, closing the door quietly behind him. In the car, he sat for a moment, feeling the weight of what had just happened, what he had just done. The end of his marriage, decided and executed with the same precision he brought to every other aspect of his life. There was pain, yes, but beneath it, a sense of clarity, of rightness. He had stood up for himself, had refused to be a victim, had ensured that those who sought to harm him would face consequences for their actions. He started the car and drove away from the house, from the life he'd built with Rosalind, from the future they planned together. There would be legal battles ahead, difficult conversations, adjustments to make. But he would face them all with the same calm determination that had carried him this FAR in the rearview mirror. The house grew smaller, then disappeared from view. Ahead lay an uncertain path, but one that he would walk on his own terms, unbowed by betrayal. The courtroom was hushed as Judge Delaney Rhodes reviewed the documents before her, her silver-streaked hair pulled back in a severe bun. At 65, she had presided over hundreds of divorce cases and had developed a reputation for cutting through emotional fog with incisive questions. Lennox sat at one table with Mara beside him, both in crisp business attire. Across the aisle, Rosalind fidgeted nervously, her normally perfect appearance slightly frayed at the edges. Her attorney, a young man with an expensive suit and an anxious expression, shuffled papers without purpose. It had been 2 months since the confrontation in their kitchen, 2 months of legal maneuvering and failed settlement negotiations. Rosalind had initially contested the divorce terms, convinced she could salvage the situation. When that failed, she'd moved to deny the affair entirely, claiming Lennox had falsified evidence to frame her. Now they were before the court for a hearing on asset division and the admissibility of certain evidence, namely the recordings Lennox had made of Cambria's confession. Judge Rhodes looked up, her sharp gaze moving from Lennox to Rosalind and back again. "Let's begin," she said, her voice carrying the weight of decades on the bench. "Mr. Bray, your attorney has filed a motion for unequal distribution of marital assets based on allegations of infidelity and malicious intent. Is that correct?" Mara stood. "Yes, Your Honor." We have extensive documentation showing that Mrs. Bray engaged in a deliberate affair as an act of retaliation based on false information. We're requesting that the court consider this behavior when determining asset division. Mrs. Bray's position. Judge Rhodes turned to Rosalind's table. Her attorney stood, smoothing his tie. Your Honor, we contest both the allegations and the legal basis for unequal distribution. Washington is a no-fault state, and we believe Mr. Bray is attempting to punish my client for alleged misconduct. It's not alleged, Mara interjected. We have hotel receipts, phone records, text messages, and bank statements showing payments from a third party to Mrs. Bray's paramour. Judge Rhodes raised an eyebrow. Payments? Yes, Your Honor. Mara passed a folder to the clerk. We have evidence that Cambria Knox, a close friend of Mrs. Bray, was making regular payments to Trevor Miles, with whom Mrs. Bray was having an affair. We believe this constitutes a conspiracy to deliberately damage the Bray's marriage. The judge reviewed the documents, her expression giving nothing away. Mrs. Bray, do you wish to respond to these allegations? Rosalind stood, visibly trembling. Your Honor, I never knew about any payments. I wasn't part of any conspiracy. But you do admit to the affair? Judge Rhodes asked directly. Rosalind hesitated, glancing at her attorney, who gave a small nod. Yes, she finally said, but it was because I believe my husband was being unfaithful first. And what evidence did you have of Mr. Bray's infidelity? Cambria told me she saw him with another woman, Rosalind said, her voice small in the large courtroom. Did you confront your husband with this information? Not directly, no. Why not? Rosalind shifted uncomfortably. I was afraid of being lied to. My father, he had affairs throughout my childhood. He always denied them, made my mother think she was imagining things. Judge Rhodes nodded, making a note. So instead of confronting him, you began an affair of your own. I was hurt and angry, Rosalind said, tears forming in her eyes. I made a terrible mistake. A mistake implies a single error in judgment, the judge observed. Your affair lasted several months, correct? Yes, Rosalind admitted. And during that time, did Mr. Bray ask you if something was wrong in your marriage? He did. Did you tell him about your suspicions? Not specifically, no. Judge Rhodes sat back, studying Rosalind intently. So you denied your husband the opportunity to address your concerns directly, chose to believe hearsay over his consistent behavior throughout your 7-year marriage, and engage in a prolonged affair as retaliation for perceived but unconfirmed infidelity. Put so baldly, Rosalind had no response. She simply nodded, tears now falling freely. The judge turned to Lennox. Mr. Bray, were you unfaithful to your wife at any point in your marriage? No, Your Honor, Lennox replied, his voice steady. I was not. And can you account for your whereabouts during the times Ms. Knox claimed to have seen you with another woman? Yes. Lennox nodded to Mara, who handed another folder to the clerk. I've provided calendar entries, meeting minutes, email exchanges, and witness statements confirming my locations. For each alleged sighting, I was in business meetings with multiple attendees. Judge Rhodes reviewed these documents carefully, then addressed Rosalind again. Mrs. Bray, did you attempt to verify Ms. Knox's claims before acting on them? No, Your Honor. I see. The judge made another note. Now, regarding these recordings Mr. Bray made of conversations with Ms. Knox. Mr. Harmon, you filed an objection to their admissibility? Rosalind's attorney stood again. Yes, Your Honor. We believe these recordings may have been obtained without Ms. Knox's knowledge or consent, which would violate Washington's two-party consent law for recordings. Mara was ready for this. Your Honor, these recordings were made in public places, a cafe and a restaurant where there is no reasonable expectation of privacy. Furthermore, they were made as part of Mr. Bray's legitimate information gathering about the conspiracy against his marriage. The court has previously recognized exceptions to the two-party consent rule in cases of self-protection. Judge Rhodes considered this. I'll review the recordings in chambers before ruling on their admissibility. Now, regarding Ms. Knox, she has been subpoenaed as a witness in this proceeding. Yes, Your Honor, Mara confirmed. She should be waiting outside. Have her brought in. The judge directed the bailiff. Moments later, Cambria entered the courtroom, her usual poise somewhat diminished by the setting. She avoided looking at either Lennox or Rosalind as she was sworn in. "Ms. Knox," Judge Rhodes began, "I understand you were a close friend of both parties in this divorce." "Yes, Your Honor. Rosalind and I have been friends since childhood, and I've known Lennox throughout their marriage." "And you told Mrs. Bray that you saw her husband with another woman on multiple occasions?" "I thought I did," Cambria said carefully. "I may have been mistaken." "May have been," the judge pressed. "Mr. Bray has provided substantial evidence that he was elsewhere during these alleged sightings." Cambria shifted uncomfortably. "It was from a distance. I could have been wrong. And yet you presented these sightings to Mrs. Bray as fact, correct?" "I was concerned for my friend," Cambria insisted. "I wanted her to be aware of the possibility." "The possibility," Judge Rhodes repeated flatly. "Ms. Knox, are you aware that Mr. Bray has evidence of regular communications between you and Mr. Trevor Miles, with whom Mrs. Bray was having an affair?" Cambria paled slightly. "We had some contact, yes, and payment from your account to his." "I loaned him money," Cambria said quickly, "for car repair." Judge Rhodes's expression made it clear she didn't believe this explanation. Regular, equal payments over a period of months, coinciding exactly with the timeline of his affair with Mrs. Bray. "It's not what it looks like," Cambria insisted. "What does it look like, Ms. Knox?" Cambria glanced at Rosalind, who was staring at her with a mixture of hurt and betrayal. "I don't know. Let me suggest what it looks like," Judge Rhodes said, her tone matter-of-fact. "It looks like you deliberately planted false suspicions about Mr. Bray in his wife's mind, then facilitated and possibly incentivized an affair that would destroy their marriage. Does that sound accurate?" Under the judge's relentless gaze, Cambria's composure cracked. "I was trying to protect Rosalind," she blurted. "Lennox isn't who she thinks he is. He's controlling, manipulative." "That's enough," Judge Rhodes cut her off. "Unless you have evidence of abuse or other criminal behavior, those characterizations are not relevant to these proceedings." After further questioning, which only reinforced the picture of Cambria's deliberate manipulation, Judge Rhodes dismissed her from the stand. The tension in the courtroom was palpable as the judge reviewed her notes. "I'll review the recordings and additional evidence in chambers," she finally said. "We'll reconvene tomorrow morning at 9 for my ruling on asset division and any related matters." The next morning, Judge Rhodes delivered her ruling with characteristic directness. "Having reviewed all evidence, including the recordings which I find admissible under the self-protection exception, I've reached the following conclusions. First, Mrs. Bray engaged in a deliberate, retaliatory affair based on unverified suspicions. Second, Ms. Knox appears to have intentionally manipulated Mrs. Bray and possibly colluded with Mr. Miles to damage the Brays' marriage. She turned her attention directly to Rosalind. While Washington is a no-fault state, the court has discretion in determining equitable, not necessarily equal distribution of assets. Mrs. Bray's behavior demonstrates bad faith in the marriage that cannot be ignored." Looking down at her paperwork, the judge continued, "Therefore, I am granting Mr. Bray's motion for unequal distribution. Mr. Bray will retain the family home and 70% of joint financial assets. Mrs. Bray will retain her personal property, vehicle, and 30% of joint financial assets." Rosalind gasped audibly, while her attorney frantically whispered in her ear. "This distribution," Judge Rhodes continued, "reflects both the breach of marital trust and the malicious intent behind it. The divorce is granted, effective immediately." With a final rap of her gavel, it was done. Lennox and Rosalind Bray were no longer husband and wife. Outside the courtroom, Rosalind attempted to approach Lennox again, but Mara smoothly intercepted her. "Any communication should go through counsel," Mara said firmly. "The judge's ruling is clear." "I just want to talk to him," Rosalind pleaded, her voice breaking. "Just for a minute." "There's nothing left to say," Lennox said, speaking to her directly for the first time since the hearing began. "It's done, Rose. Accept it and move on." "How can you be so cold?" Rosalind demanded, anger flaring through her tears. 7 years of marriage, and you can just walk away without a backward glance. I'm not the one who walked away, Lennox replied evenly. You did that the moment you decided to betray our vows instead of talking to me. Before she could respond, he turned and walked down the courthouse steps, each step taking him further from the life he'd once had, from the woman he'd once loved. There was grief, yes, but underneath it, a sense of clarity, of justice served. The legal battlefield had yielded its verdict, and now it was time to rebuild from the ashes. 3 weeks after the divorce was finalized, Lennox sat in a downtown coffee shop, reviewing business proposals on his laptop. He'd moved into a modern apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Puget Sound, the space minimally but comfortably furnished. The fresh start felt right, no reminders of Rosalind, no echoes of their shared life. Silas slid into the seat across from him, setting down 2 cups of coffee. You look better. Feel better, Lennox agreed, closing his laptop. How's the Cambria situation? Deposition scheduled for next Tuesday, Silas reported. Mara's confident. Says Cambria cracked under basic questioning in the divorce hearing, so she'll likely fall apart completely in a more aggressive deposition. Lennox nodded, taking a sip of his coffee. The civil suit against Cambria was proceeding, with Mara building a case for intentional infliction of emotional distress and civil conspiracy. The financial evidence or payments to Trevor had proven particularly damning. And Rose? Silas asked cautiously. What about her? Heard anything? Lennox shook his head. Not directly. Mara mentioned that she accepted the final judgment without appeal, so at least she's not dragging things out further. What he didn't mention were the emails, the texts, the voicemails, all unanswered, all variations on the same theme of regret and request for forgiveness. He'd blocked her number after the first week, set up email filters to send her messages to a folder he never opened. She lost her job, Silas said, watching Lennox carefully for a reaction. Apparently, when the affair with Trevor came out, it violated some company policy about supervisor-subordinate relationships. He'd been promoted to her team lead 2 months ago. Lennox's expression didn't change. Not my concern. Trevor dumped her too. Ghosted her completely once the payments from Cambria stopped. Again, not my concern. Silas studied his brother. You really don't care what happens to her, do you? Lennox considered the question seriously. It's not about caring or not caring. It's about boundaries. Her choices led to consequences. That's the natural order of things. Cold, but fair, Silas acknowledged. What about your consequences? 7 years is a long time to invest in someone. You can't tell me you just walked away unscathed. I didn't say that, Lennox replied quietly. There's grief, anger, disappointment, but dwelling on those emotions doesn't serve any purpose. Better to channel the energy into something productive, like a new business idea. Silas raised an eyebrow. Exactly. Lennox opened his laptop again, pulling up a business plan. I've been talking with Mara about it. A legal tech startup focused on helping people in similar situations, providing digital tools for gathering and securely storing evidence in cases of infidelity, harassment, or other relationship breaches. Turning your personal nightmare into a business opportunity, Silas remarked. That's very you. It's not just about business, Lennox corrected. It's about helping people protect themselves, about giving them the tools to stand up for the truth when someone tries to manipulate or gaslight them. And Mara's on board. She'll handle the legal side, making sure everything we develop is admissible in court, compliant with privacy laws, all of that. I'll develop the tech platform. And where do I fit in? Silas asked with a knowing smile. Security protocols, Lennox replied, returning the smile. Nobody better at that than you. They spent the next hour discussing specifics, funding, development timelines, potential clients. It felt good to be building something new, something that might help others navigate situations similar to what he'd endured. They were wrapping up. Silas's phone buzzed with a news alert. He glanced at it, then let out a low whistle. What? Lennox asked. Cambria Knox just got fired from her firm, Silas reported, reading from his phone. Apparently some emails surfaced showing her using company resources to track Rosalind's movements during your marriage. Corporate espionage allegations. Lennox didn't reply, but a flicker of satisfaction crossed his face. "You wouldn't know anything about those emails surfacing, would you?" Silas asked, one eyebrow raised. "I don't hack into private systems," Lennox said evenly. "That would be illegal, but you might anonymously report misuse of systems you had legitimate access to." Silas pressed. Lennox merely shrugged, neither confirming nor denying. "As I said, choices have consequences." Later that day, as Lennox was reviewing potential office spaces for the new startup, his phone rang with Mara's number. "Just left a meeting with Cambria's attorneys," Mara reported without preamble. "They're offering to settle the civil suit. Terms, $200,000, full admission of liability, and a non-disclosure agreement preventing her from discussing you, Rosalind, or your marriage with anyone in the future." Lennox considered this. "The money doesn't matter to me," he said finally. "But the admission and the NDA do." "Accept it." "You sure?" Mara sounded surprised. "We could push for more." "It's not about the money," Lennox reiterated. "It's about making sure she can't do this to anyone else, at least not without significant risk. The admission of liability creates a record. The NDA creates consequences for further interference." "All right," Mara agreed. "I'll draw up the acceptance paperwork." "And Lennox?" "This is a good outcome. Clean, definitive. The best kind," he agreed. That evening, Lennox stood at his apartment window, watching the sun set over the Sound. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Rosalind, using a friend's phone to bypass his block. I heard about Cambria's firing and the settlement. Karma, I guess. I'm sorry for everything, Lennox. More than I can say. If you ever want to talk." He deleted the message without responding, then blocked the new number. There was nothing left to say, no conversation that would serve any purpose except to drag him back into the past. The consequences were still unfolding for Rosalind, for Cambria, for Trevor. The structures they'd built their lives around were collapsing, while Lennox was building something new from the ashes of his betrayal. IT wasn't revenge, he told himself. It was justice. It was truth prevailing over lies. It was the natural order reasserting itself. And if there was satisfaction in watching that process unfold, well, that was only human. 6 months after the divorce, Lennox sat across from a reporter in the conference room of his new office. The startup Truth Shield had launched to unexpected success, attracting clients and investors faster than even his optimistic projections had anticipated. "So the idea came from your personal experience?" the reporter asked, digital recorder running between them. "Yes," Lennox confirmed. "I found myself in a situation where I needed to document patterns of behavior and securely store evidence. The tools available were fragmented, difficult to use in emotional circumstances, and not optimized for legal proceedings. And now you're helping others do the same." "Exactly. Our platform provides secure, legally sound methods for documenting relationship breaches, whether that's infidelity, emotional abuse, gaslighting, or other forms of manipulation. The goal is to give people tools to protect themselves with truth." "Some critics suggest you're profiting from relationship failures," the reporter noted. "I'd say we're providing resources for clarity in difficult situations," Lennox countered smoothly. "The relationships have already failed by the time people come to us. We just help them navigate the aftermath with facts rather than emotional reactions." The interview continued, covering the technical aspects of the platform, the legal safeguards built into the system, the growing client base. Throughout, Lennox maintained his composed, articulate demeanor, the same controlled presence that had served him so well in court. After the reporter left, Mara entered the conference room, legal briefcase in hand. "That went well," she observed, "though I notice you never mentioned Rosalind or Cambria by name." "No need," Lennox replied. "The story isn't about them. It's about what we're building here." Mara nodded, setting her briefcase on the table. "Speaking of Rosalind, this came for you." She handed him an envelope, his name and office address written in Rosalind's familiar handwriting. Lennox stared at it for a moment. "You could have just shredded it." "Thought about it," Mara admitted. "But it's not my place to decide what you should or shouldn't read. Just because we're partners now doesn't mean I filter your personal correspondence." Lennox took the envelope, turning it over in his hands. "What do you think it says?" "More apologies, probably." Maybe a plea for closure. It's been 6 months, she might be trying to move on. He nodded, still not opening it. How's the Thompson case coming along? Mara allowed the change of subject. Good. The evidence he gathered using our platform has been deemed admissible. Trial starts next month, but his wife's attorney is already making settlement noises. They spent the next hour discussing ongoing cases and platform improvements, the envelope sitting untouched on the table. Only after Mara left did Lennox pick it up again, turning it over in his hands. Part of him wanted to throw it away unopened. What could Rosalind possibly say that would matter now? Their marriage was over, the legal battles concluded, their lives firmly on separate paths. But another part, the same methodical, thorough part that made him excel at security work, wanted all available information. Wanted to know what she thought was important enough to write after 6 months of silence. He slit the envelope open with a letter opener, pulling out several handwritten pages. Lennox, I've started this letter 100 times over the past 6 months. Each attempt ended up in the trash because nothing I write seems adequate to address what happened between us. That I won't ask for forgiveness. I know that's not something you give easily, if at all. And I won't make excuses for my choices. They were mine, made from a place of fear and insecurity that I should have addressed long before they poisoned our marriage. What I want to say is simply this. You were right. About everything. Cambria manipulated me, used my childhood fears against me. But I let her. I chose to believe the worst about you rather than trust the man who had never given me reason to doubt him. That's entirely on me. The affair with Trevor wasn't about him. It was about punishing you for a betrayal you never committed. It was childish, vindictive, and ultimately self-destructive. I see that now, with painful clarity, that I've been in therapy since the divorce, working to understand why I was so quick to believe lies about someone I claimed to love. The answers aren't pretty, but they're necessary if I'm ever going to have healthy relationships in the future. That I've seen the stories about your new company. It seems you found a way to help others avoid the trap I fell into. That's good. That's important work. That I don't expect a response to this letter. I don't even expect you to read it. But I needed to acknowledge the truth one last time. You deserved better than what I gave you. You deserved a wife who would ask direct questions instead of assuming the worst, who would trust years of honorable behavior over a friend's unfounded accusations. That I hope you find happiness, Lennox. Real happiness with someone worthy of your loyalty and integrity. Goodbye. Rosalind Lennox folded the letter carefully, returning it to the envelope. He sat in silence for several minutes, absorbing her words, examining his reaction to them. There was no satisfaction in her pain, no vindication in her regret. Just a quiet acknowledgement that, yes, this was the truth of what had happened. She had finally seen it clearly, too late to matter for them, but perhaps not too late for her future. He opened his desk drawer, placed the letter inside, and closed it again. Then he turned to his computer, focusing on the work before him, a new client needing help documenting a partner's financial deception, new security protocol for the platform, marketing materials for an upcoming conference. The past was fixed, immutable. The letter changed nothing about what had happened, nothing about his path forward. It was simply information, data points confirming what he already knew. When Silas called later that evening to suggest dinner, Lennox agreed readily. Life continued its forward motion, shaped but not defined by what had come before. 1 year to the day after his divorce was finalized, Lennox stood at a podium in a packed hotel ballroom, addressing an audience of lawyers, therapists, and individuals who had experienced relationship betrayal. The most dangerous aspect of betrayal isn't the act itself, he was saying, his calm voice carrying clearly through the sound system. It's the fog that surrounds it, the lies, the gaslighting, the manipulation of reality. When you can't trust what you're being told, you start to doubt your own perceptions. That's where true damage occurs. Heads nodded throughout the audience. This was his 4th speaking engagement in 2 months, each venue larger than the last as word spread about his unique approach to emotional trauma and recovery. What saved me wasn't anger or desire for revenge, he continued. It was commitment to truth, to gathering facts, documenting patterns, building an unassailable case, not just for the legal system, but for my own sanity. After his presentation, There was a long line of people waiting to speak with him. Some had questions about Truth Shield services, others wanted advice on their personal situations. Still others simply wanted to thank him for articulating what they'd experienced but couldn't explain. Mara appeared at his elbow as the last attendee walked away. Another successful conversion of personal tragedy into professional triumph, she observed dryly. You've got quite a following developing. That's not the goal, Lennox replied. The goal is to help people protect themselves with facts instead of drowning in emotional reactions. Well, whatever the goal, it's working, Mara said. Our client list has doubled since you started these talks, and the platform's getting excellent reviews. They walked together toward the exit, discussing upcoming features for the Truth Shield platform. The business had evolved beyond its initial focus on infidelity to address other forms of relationship breaches, workplace gaslighting, financial deception, emotional manipulation in families. The Thompson case officially closed today, Mara reported as they stepped outside. Full custody granted, based largely on the evidence he gathered using our system. Lennox nodded, satisfaction evident in his expression. That's what this is all about, giving people the tools to stand up for themselves, to cut through manipulation with clear evidence. Speaking of evidence, Mara said, her tone shifting slightly. Silas mentioned Rosalind's move to Chicago. Lennox didn't react visibly to the name. After a year, it had lost most of its emotional charge. Good for her. Aren't you curious what she's doing there? Not particularly, he replied honestly. Her life is her own now, as mine is mine. Mara studied him for a moment. You really have moved on, haven't you? Completely. Life only moves in one direction, Lennox said simply. Forward. Looking back serves no purpose except to learn lessons that improve the path ahead. As Lennox walked back to his hotel room, he reflected on how completely his life had transformed in a single year. From the ashes of betrayal, he had built something new, not just a business, but a purpose. A way to channel his natural abilities toward helping others navigate the treacherous terrain of relationship deception. IT wasn't the future he'd planned with Rosalind. It was something entirely different, shaped by the very experience that had destroyed that original vision. Something that could not have existed without the pain that preceded it. There was a certain symmetry to that, a balance that appealed to his logical mind. Creation from destruction, clarity from confusion, strength from vulnerability, rebirth from ashes. 18 months after the divorce, Lennox returned to his office after a business trip to find a familiar envelope on his desk. The handwriting was instantly recognizable, Rosalind's, though the postmark showed it had come from Chicago rather than Seattle. He picked it up, weighing it in his hand. Lighter than the last one, just a single page inside by the feel of it. For a moment, he considered throwing it away, unopened. Their chapter was closed, the book shelved. What purpose could another letter serve? But curiosity won out, as it often did with him. He opened the envelope carefully, removing the single sheet of paper inside. Lennox, I promise this will be my last communication. I respected your silence and your boundaries. I'm not writing to reopen old wounds or seek forgiveness you have every right to withhold. I'm writing because I saw the article about Truth Shield in Business Weekly. I want to tell you that what you've built is important. The platform you've created might have saved our marriage if it had existed then, or at least prevented the damage Cambria was able to cause. I've continued therapy and finally understand that my failure wasn't just believing Cambria, it was not trusting you enough to simply ask, not giving you the chance to defend yourself. I projected my father's behavior onto you, which was deeply unfair to the man you always were. I'm moving forward with my life now. New city, new career path, teaching marketing at a community college, new understanding of myself and my patterns. I hope you continue to thrive in the life you've built from the wreckage I helped create, and I'm enclosing something I think belongs with you, not me. Do with it what you will. Goodbye. Truly and finally, Rosalind Lennox turned the envelope upside down, and a small object fell onto his desk, her wedding ring. The platinum band caught the light, a tangible symbol of promises made and broken. He picked it up, turning it between his fingers. Inside was the inscription he'd chosen years ago. Truth before comfort. It had been their unofficial motto during the good years, the commitment to honest communication, even when difficult, to facing reality together rather than hiding in comfortable illusions. The very principle that Rosalind had abandoned when she chose to believe Cambria's lies without question, when she retaliated with betrayal instead of confronting him directly. Lennox set the ring down beside the letter, considering his response. Should he acknowledge receipt? Return the ring? Ignore it entirely? In the end, simplicity seemed best. He took a piece of company letterhead and wrote a single line. I wish you well on your journey forward. He signed it with just his initial L, placed it in a Truth Shield envelope, and handed it to his assistant for mailing, along with the ring. Later, alone in his apartment, Lennox built a small fire in the decorative fireplace. He took Rosalind's letter, read it one last time, then placed it in the flames, watching as it curled and blackened, turning to a SH.IT wasn't an angry gesture, but a symbolic one. The final closing of a chapter that had changed the trajectory of his life in ways he never could have anticipated. The paper crumbled to ash. Lennox felt a sense of completion. Not happiness, exactly, but something adjacent to it, the satisfaction of having navigated a terrible storm with his core self intact, of having built something meaningful from the wreckage, of having remained true to his principles even when they cost him dearly. The past was finally, truly settled. Reduced to ash, its weight transformed into something else entirely: wisdom, perspective, strength. The raw materials from which he'd built his new life. Lennox turned away from the fire, focusing instead on his laptop and the work that awaited him, a new module for the Truth Shield platform, designed to help users recognize manipulation tactics before they took root. Prevention rather than reaction. Wisdom born of experience. Outside, the Seattle rain fell steadily, washing the city clean. Inside, Lennox moved forward, step by deliberate step, into a future entirely of his own making.